моих исследований, которые я делал в городе Сдероте в марте и апреле этого года. И они связаны с темой моей будущей кандидатской диссертации, которую я пишу сейчас на университете в Мюнхене. Так, тема моего доклада — это Collective Memory of the Holocaust among the Mountain Jews in Contemporary Israel, Case Study of Sderot. The current study was conducted among the members of the mountain Jewish community in the southern Israeli town of Sderot. It is located less than 5 kilometers across from the Gaza Strip. Sderot is inhabited by about 25,000 residents, mostly low-paid Jews originating from the Middle Eastern and Maghreb countries, the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia. It was originally founded in 1951 as a ma'abara, which is a transit refugee absorption camp, Gevim Dohot, that meant to provide accommodation for the influx of new Jewish immigrants from Iran, Kurdistan, and Morocco. And around 1954, when Israel started to bring over the 250,000 Jews of Morocco, the camp of Gevim Dohot, it began to transform into so-called development town called Ayahat Pituach in Hebrew. And the social structure of the town changed, I would say, significantly after Sderot had absorbed a large immigration wave during the Aliyah from the former Soviet Union, mostly in the 1990s, and its population doubled during this decade. In the case of Sderot, the rate of immigrants from the former Soviet Union in the year 2000, it comprised 36%, which is very high. And we have no accurate data on the place of origin of all these new immigrants. However, some scholars estimate that among them between 40 to 65,000 were the mountain Jews from the Caucasus, I mean the scale of the whole Israel, of course, who joined around 15,000 of their compatriots who immigrated to Israel in the 1970s, in the Russian period Aliyah. And many of them settled in Sderot, I would say gradually evolving into a very well-organized community with its own clubs, centers, a synagogue, various cultural activities and political significance in the municipality. And since the escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the beginning of the Second Intifada in September 2000, Sderot, due to its geographical proximity to the Strip, became a constant target of Qassam missile attacks and frequent mortar bombardment. And the specific life conditions, I would say, as well as small number of inhabitants and a very compact town area, they resulted in strong social bonds among its residents and both holistic and within individual groups of different ethnic origins, including the Jews of the Caucasus. And also, before relocating to Sderot, most of the Caucasian Jews, I would say, they lived in rather poor, impoverished, violent, and dysfunctional regions of Russia, in the Caucasus.
Если можно громче.
Громче еще.
Да.
Хорошо. Okay, so, and those mountain Jews who for various, mostly financial reasons, because land and housing in the south were much cheaper than in the central district of Israel, choose Sderot as the place of their immigration, were once again exposed to the trauma of the armed conflict in this region. And among them were also the survivors of the Holocaust, their children and grandchildren, from the town of Nalchik, for example, which is the capital of Kabardino-Balkar Republic in the Russian Federation. Now a bit about the historical background. So it must be noted that the mountain Jewish communities experienced the World War II and the Holocaust in diverse ways, that is ranging from ghettoization to mass executions. And in the aftermath of Case Blue Offensive between June and November 1942, German forces began their rather short, because it's between 2.5 and 4 months, depending on the territory, occupation of the Caucasus. And the Nazis, they were aware of the existence of the mountain Jews before the invasion, albeit their ethnic composition was not entirely clear for them. And the occupants' policy towards the Caucasian Jewish population, it varied depending on the place, period, type of armed forces that were stationed in the territory. And the first community of the Mountain Jews, whose members were placed there under the auspices of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, was captured in the Shaumian Kolkhoz in the Crimean Peninsula. And in March 1942, 114 Mountain Jewish inhabitants of the place were executed by Einsatzgruppen and their local collaborators, probably military gendarmerie. And a similar tragic fate met about 850 Caucasian Jews who resided in two kolkhozes in Bogdanovka and Piężyńskoje in Stavropol Kraj that were murdered respectively in September and October 1942. And the situation of the Caucasian Jewish community inhabiting Nalchik was completely different, and there were numerous reasons why during 2 months of the occupation, between late October 1942 and early January 1943, the Nazis refrained from murdering the Mountain Jews there, and in contrast to the population of the mentioned above centers, the Mountain Jews live in Nalchik for over 100 years. They were maintaining very close and friendly relations with the local Muslims, and they were being seen as another, I would say, indigenous nation of the Kabardia. And even though the German and Romanian soldiers were engaging in cruel actions such as plundering Jewish homes, mandating forced labor, and also during the initial period of the occupation they killed several dozen Mountain Jews, nonetheless there were no mass murders later committed. And among the factors, I would say, that helped to save the Juhuhu, there was the sympathetic also attitude of the local population, mostly Kabardians, resulting from the close-knit nature of the local community. And the other reason was also a decision of the German authorities to simply postpone the annihilation of the Mountain Jews until the racial status could be eventually determined. And scholars such as Itzhak Ahat and Georg Pfefferman, they estimate that more than 1,000 Mountain Jews perished during the Holocaust. However, they disagree over the number of those who were not evacuated, remained in the occupied Caucasus territory, and survived the Shoah there. The only question that still remains, I would say, unclear is the fate of the Mountain Jews dwelling in Mozdok, in Ordzhonikidze Kraj. And the earlier scientific research and testimonies of witnesses, they drew attention to the geographical location of the town on the front line, which supposedly would protect the local community. However, for example, Kirill Pfefferman, he disagrees with this explanation, postulating that had the Nazis been aware of the Mountain Jews' presence in Mozdok, they would have hesitated as they did in Nalchik pending an investigation. However, my research in Sderot showed that there were some of the Mountain Jews from Mozdok taken to the village of Piężyńskoje and murdered there together with the local population. And one such example will be discussed further in this paper. So now a bit about the remembrance of the Holocaust. The remembrance of the genocide, though affecting a comparatively small number of the Mountain Jews, I would say was largely influenced by the state policy of commemoration in the Soviet Union. And the USSR, all the Holocaust commemoration efforts, they were very early suspended as a result of the blatant governmental anti-Semitic campaign. And after Stalin's death in 1953, the subject of the Holocaust of the Soviet Jewry, including, of course, the Mountain Jews, it continued to be repressed by the authorities and the Soviet historiography that ignored the Jewish role in the World War II and suppressed, I would say, the free historical inquiry. And it's also clear that even after 1991, the majority of the Mountain Jews living far from large urban centers and areas where the level of general education was rather deficient, they did not come into contact with a new mainstream narrative about the Holocaust, and it's due to this time frame that most of them left Israel in the early 1990s, that they did not become the object of interest for the new discourse emerging after the fall of communism. And of course the narratives on the Holocaust, they were totally different in Israel and the Soviet Union. So while in the Soviet Union we have this dominant narrative that suppressed the Jewish identities of Hitler's victims, referring to them as Soviet citizens or simply victims of fascism, the Israeli national discourse for decades was exposing only the experience of the Ashkenazi Jews. And they believed that the murder of 6 million Jews during the Second World War was limited exclusively to the Ashkenazi Jews and did not affect other non-European communities, remains, I would say, remarkably widespread. And this perspective on the Holocaust is also reflected in academic studies, and until recently most historians, they have focused their research on the places most eminent from the point of view of both affected populations and mass exterminations, in Poland, for example. Okay, so now let's move a bit to the results of my research I did. First of all, data collection and study participants. So the study was conducted, as I already mentioned, in March and April 2019 in the town of Sderot. And the sample consists only in this one town of 19 Jewish residents originating from the Caucasus who immigrated to Israel in the 1990s and 2000s. And the response rate was 100%. Participants differed in terms of socioeconomic profile. So in gender, age at immigration, city of origin in the Caucasus, household composition, education, pre-immigration, and current occupations. And such a diverse group was deliberately selected to confirm the hypothesis regarding the collective memory of the Holocaust among the mountain Jews that would be independent of the both factors. And the socio-demographic composition of the informants typified members of the second and third generations of Holocaust survivors and the mountain Jews from Dagestan, all of them born in the former Soviet Union between 1945 and 1982. And establishing contact with this focus group was possible thanks to my acquaintance with the Jew community members, Caucasian immigrants clubs, and veterans organizations. And the participants were approached after initial telephone contact and interviewed during the fieldwork, individually, in a private location, and in the Russian language. And this method was chosen since the response rate and data quality in this kind of face-to-face interviews are much higher than in any other survey. And assurance of confidentiality and anonymity was given to each of the respondents. The interviews were audio recorded with response, with permission, transcribed, translated into English, analyzed within the framework of the grounded theory. And the principal findings are presented below. As usual in qualitative studies, they are not readily generalizable for the whole target population. Okay. Нет, сейчас. Так, у меня есть часть, которая связана с методологией. Она, я, может, подойду к этому, что я нашел.
Минут 10-12 для самого доклада.
So now let's move to the part about my observations and findings during this fieldwork. So the major point to emerge from the interviews is that all the participants have at least minimal knowledge of the Holocaust acquired during the Soviet period and expanded after their immigration to Israel. And at the same time, the majority of the participants of the study, they claim that for the mountain Jewish community, the Great Patriotic Fatherland War of 1941-45 is more significant and traumatic experience than the Holocaust. Atu Zachariayev, 37, he stressed that in his childhood he could still feel fresh wounds of his ancestors killed in the war. These wounds were in some way scratched by what he calls a communist Soviet spirit of patriotism, meaning ongoing talks on battles, German atrocities, civilian casualties, and heroism of the Soviet nation. And I would say that quite a few interviewees expressed the same feeling, stating that in the Caucasus people were talking more often about the war than about the Holocaust. And however, a noticeable tendency, which also Zvi Gitelman mentions in the context of a poll carried out in 2003 among Russians about the Great Patriotic War, is observed among the participants of this research. So the heroizing of the war, that was like especially typical for Brezhnev-era propaganda, is being nowadays replaced in the public mind by feelings of bitter sorrow and horror of the war. And each of the study participants mentioned a certain, I would say, turning point connected with the Holocaust that influenced their desire to expand knowledge regarding this topic. And for example, Mahacheva-born Sima Hanukayeva, 52, she remembers a number tattoo on a forearm of her distant relative called Amel Nazarov. And according to her, Nazarov was sent to Auschwitz as a Soviet prisoner of war and survived only by pretending to be a Chechen, thus not being qualified in the camp as a Jew. And she also remembers exactly when in 1985 she went with her father to a local bazaar to buy on the black market a 2-volume publication entitled The Nuremberg Trial. And to this day, it remains the most important book in her life and the only one she brought with her to Israel. Another example is Nata Shalumova, 45, who recalls, now the quote, "We were born and grew up in the USSR. The subject of the extermination of Jews, in the sense that it was the extermination of this very nation, was not depicted as the Holocaust. We are told that these people died during the Great Patriotic Fatherland's War, that the Soviet citizens were being killed. No one emphasized that it was the Holocaust. We found out all this much later. In 2013, while living in Rishon LeZion, she went to watch the film Shoah directed by Claude Lanzmann. Quote, I saw it in several parts. They shot this movie for 12 years, even Gorbachev talked to the director. After watching it, I felt a great need to learn more about the heritage of the Holocaust, about my history, not only from my relatives, but also to ascertain as many facts as possible. I began to look for information about Międzyńskoje. I found out that this place does not exist anymore, that is now called Górska. Another person is Adu Zachariaev, who immigrated to Israel in his childhood from the town of Nalchik. And first he heard about the events in Bogdanovka from his father, who was listening to the broadcast beamed in the USSR by the jammed Russian language radio channel of Kol Israel. And however, in his opinion, the people in the Caucasus were talking more often about the war than about the Holocaust. He understood better what the Holocaust was in Israel. And when I heard the sirens on Yom HaShoah, he's saying, for the first time I began to cry. I did not know why. It was only after some time that I realized that what the Holocaust really was, how many people died, that it did not concern only a few hundred inhabitants of Nalchik or these two kolkhozes, but many millions. Then I started to read and collect information on this topic. And regarding, for example, the presence of the subject of the Holocaust in the Soviet school curriculum, I would say that memories of the interviewees, they are extremely diverse. So some of them claim that there were lessons about the Holocaust in their primary schools, for example, people that are originating from Makhachkala, while others originating from Nalchik said that there was absolutely nothing mentioned in their curriculum. So here it's like, we are not sure. And like basing on my research, I would say that it can be concluded that the Soviet attempts also to keep the Holocaust out of the mountain Jewish consciousness have not succeeded. And the perfect example is the one that I already mentioned before. So one of my interviewers mentioned car trips to the kolkhozes of Bogdanovka and former area of Międzyńskoje, so Stanica Górskaya nowadays, that were organized in the 1980s and 90s. And they were organized by nowadays 60-year-old, Alexander Solomonov, who was born in the Dagestani city of Khasavyurt. And Solomonov's grandmother and aunt, they were forced to serve as cooks for German soldiers who were like stationing at their home in Mozdok. And in October 1942, his mother, Yevgenia Solomonova, and her two children, Major and Katya, they were transported from Mozdok to the village of Międzyńskoje and executed there. And 4 other children, including Alexander's mother, survived the war and later moved to Dagestan. And while growing up, Solomonov avoided asking his relatives about their experiences concerning the Shoah. And nonetheless, the topic appeared every year on the occasion of the Victory Day, 9th of May, celebration. On this date, his family members, as well as their neighbors and friends from other towns who also lost their relatives in Stavropol Krai, they were like setting off from Dagestan in procession of several vehicles and driving over 180 kilometers so they could like lay flowers and mourn the people murdered in Bogdanovka and Międzyńskoje. And I would say that another manifestation of this so-called social disobedience was the presence of the Holocaust in everyday talks in the Soviet period. So one of my interviewers recalls, people spoke openly about the Holocaust, mainly on the occasion of the Victory Day in Pabieda. However, we talked only about the Holocaust in Europe, and there was no mention of the Holocaust in Nalchik or Bogdanovka. The emphasis was placed only on the European Jews in the 1970s, talks about post-war trials post-war trials and camps began. The emphasis was put on Jewish issues for the first time in the public sphere. Okay, since we have only 3 minutes, now let's move to the final conclusions, wherever they are. Okay, so results. So in contrast to the previous scholarly literature, this research, I would say, included the investigation of the ways in which the members of the long-time Jewish community who did not experience the Holocaust directly, by this I mean second, third generation, perceived the Holocaust. So in addition, in order to expand our understanding of the formative process of this group's awareness of the Holocaust, I would say the great deal of attention was given to the rememberers within the analyzed community. And this study also sheds light, some light at least, on immigrants' experience regarding commemoration in both old and new surroundings. Some from two different perspectives, I mean Israeli perspective and Soviet or Russian perspective. And it examines the way in which the mountain Jews feel connected with the general experience of the Holocaust of the Soviet Jewry. And namely whether the mountain Jews consider themselves a part of what now can be called the post-Soviet Jewry, or rather maintain strict separation and perceive their wartime experience independently. And I would say that, like, to answer this question, the main focus was placed on the ways in which the Caucasian Jews' memory of the Holocaust developed, and how it was shaped by their marginalization in the Soviet and Israeli public and media discourses, as well as by other dependent factors, such as, for example, influence of environment, access to education and publications, place of residence, so therefore also place of primary and secondary socialization. And like I would say that findings of my exploratory study, they indicate, of course, the existence of some kind of collective memory of the Holocaust among the mountain Jews living in Israel, which is based on a strong sense, in my opinion, of national identity within this group nowadays in Israel. And the conducted fieldwork has also confirmed most of my previous hypotheses. So the Holocaust occupies significant place in the consciousness of the mountain Jews. The awareness of the Holocaust is not significantly higher in second and third generations of the victims' descendants than among the descendants of those mountain Jews who were living not occupied territory. Third one is that most of the mountain Jews perceive the Holocaust as a part of the great patriotic fatherland's war experience, although they recognize the uniqueness in comparison with the experience of the other nations in the Soviet Union. And the fourth one is that generations brought up in Israel have greater knowledge of the Holocaust of the European Jewry, which is very interesting, than those raised in the USSR, which I would say reflects simply the different education system, diverse public discourses on the Holocaust in the Second World War.
Thank you.
Вопросы? Пожалуйста. Можно по-русски или по-английски?
Можно по-русски.
Спасибо вам большое. Мне вспоминается идея Алейды Ассман о том, что есть два главных способа коммеморации Холокоста. Один из них — это легитимность, жертвенность, горе, да? Другой, наоборот, героизация, в том числе Варшавского восстания, и была одна практически неизвестная попытка восстания под Моздоком. Да, это очень редкая история. Скажите, пожалуйста, вот среди горских евреев в современном Израиле какой из этих двух типов памяти присутствует?
Значит, это сложный вопрос, я бы сказал, потому что, так, с одной стороны, у нас есть вся эта героизация, которая как бы была во время Советского Союза, и, конечно, тоже у нас есть влияние, тоже настоящего дискурса об Израиле, например, Йом ха-Шоа, да, и это, это имеет значение в израильтянском обществе сейчас. Это одно, но с другой стороны, говоря как бы с моими информантами, называется на русском, информантами, я тоже заметил, что у многих из них есть такое чувство, что в истории, в советское время и с тех пор, когда они приехали в Израиль, как бы опыт горских евреев, их опыт Холокоста, он был недостаточно как бы показан, недостаточно...
Игнорируете.
Да, это просто игнорируется. И поэтому, по-моему, их как бы, подход, смотря на теорию Османов, да, он как бы включает как бы два эти подхода, которые пишет Алайда Осман, да, он делает развитие теории своего мужа. Да. Я ответил на ваш вопрос?
Спасибо большое.
Еще вопросы? Пожалуйста.
I think it's a very important and very interesting research. I would suggest to pay attention also to the development in Israeli discourse of the collective memory of the Great Patriotic War. And I'm also interested, what was the place of the discourse of compensations in your interviews?
So, answering what you said first, yes, about the Great Patriotic Fatherland's War. So I was also part of the questions that I was using during my survey, during my field research. They are connected with the Smiertny Polk and with participation of the Mountain Jews in this 9 of May commemorations. So, for example, in Sderot, where we have those two monuments, right? One is for the victims of the Shoah, the other one is for the Second World War. That still there is no monument for like Soviet soldiers, or for sure nothing for the Mountain Jews separately, but still they participate, I would say, en masse in all the celebrations, commemoration process, etc. So yes, this I included also. And I'm not sure what you mean by your second question, like, so you mean the...
There was a struggle.
Struggle, right.
To get compensation.
Started by Valery Kuvet, right, of course, and finally the decision of the Supreme Court. So I would say that's, like, their approach is very positive, that finally the Israeli government has recognized them as victims of the Shoah. But I have noticed like any specific approach, like they are simply satisfied that they're receiving money, and finally after so many dozens of years they are considered as victims of the Shoah, so being part of this main narrative in the Israeli society.
So the whole process didn't leave any, let's say, bad feelings or so on. They just said, okay, thank God we are getting this.
You know, when you're getting money, you have positive feelings about it, right? But no, after conducting more than 40 interviews altogether, around 25% of them with the survivors from Nalchik, from Mozdok also. No, I haven't had this kind of feeling for sure.
Еще? Есть вопрос? Тогда у меня маленький комментарий, если можно. У нас есть еще 5 минут. Появляется возможность опять апеллировать к своим полевым информации 80-х годов. А вот я никогда этого не касался, это очень интересно. Я тогда зафиксировал интересный феномен. Практически абсолютную информационную изолированность отдельных групп горских евреев, вот тех же варташенцев или шарванцев в Баку, или даже кубинцев, хотя среди них там несколько больше была информация, о том, что происходило, скажем, в районе Богдановки и Минджинского, тем более в Крыму. Я думаю, что надо учитывать, что практически вообще информационная изолированность была в советский период. Вторая часть этой же проблемы. Сейчас, вот если анализировать горские еврейские сайты, проблема Холокоста горских евреев одна из важнейших составляющих той идентичности, которая как бы декларируется. И поэтому я думаю, что когда вы будете анализировать ответы своих информантов, тем более старшего поколения, там были люди выжившие, на них, я думаю, в большей степени оказывает влияние не израильское информационное поле и не проблема Холокоста в Израиле, а как раз вот русскоязычные горско-еврейские сайты. которые формируют достаточно определенную как бы картину. Ведь не надо забывать, что есть проект получить статус жертв Холокоста, который получен, не получен, я не знаю, но я знаю, что горские еврейские общественные организации занимались этим достаточно. Но я. Теперь, вот то, что последнее, пожалуй, что я хотел сейчас сказать. Есть мои попытки говорить на не совсем удобные темы периода Холокоста.